Hello students. Now in the previous class or in the previous session we have seen how what is soil. Okay, and I have given you insights as to what is the function of the soil. Okay, now in this session we will be looking at how soil is formed. Okay, it's not just like that, just something came and something mixed and something happened and then the soil is formed. Okay, now it is a process which has taken millions of years to occur. Okay, so formation of a soil is a very slow process. Okay, right? Now soil is formed by weathering of rocks. Okay, now solid rock can weather away in one of the three ways into the soil, namely, okay, mechanical weathering, chemical weathering and biological weathering. Now before we go into all these three, I would like to just tell you what weathering is. Weathering is basically slow breaking away of rocks. Okay, now it can be a physical by a physical mean, or it can be a chemical mean, or it can be a biological mean. Okay, right? So we'll see that once we are going into the depth of this topic. Okay, now when we say when we talk about weathering, so I hope that you remember that we talked about sediments. Soil is formed by the sediments basically. Okay, now I told you that when you go to say Kurnool, and if you travel to Banganpalli from Kurnool in AP, you will see that there are plates of sedimented rocks like this which are very loose. Okay, right? Now these rocks, when they are placed like the plates, okay, they are they are pressed upon by the pressure on from the top. Okay, right? So when they are pressed upon so hard that they start cracking. Now these are these things are basically the physical conditions which actually act on them and they break them. Okay, so say for example you have the physical conditions like wind, water and temperature. All these play a major role in the weathering of rocks. So that is what we are going to see in all those three types of weathering. Okay, right? So soil rock can weather in three forms. The first one is the mechanical weathering, second one is the chemical weathering, third one is the biological weathering. All right, so let's see the first one, which is mechanical weathering. Okay, right? So mechanical weathering is commonly observed near the surface of the earth, also called physical weathering, as this process is influenced by physical forces such as wind, water and temperature. Okay, now when we talk about mechanical weathering, it is basically a physical process. Okay, it's a physical process. Now when we are saying that it's a physical process, so we should never forget that when we are talking about soil, wind, water and temperature, so these three will play a major role here. Okay, so in mechanical weathering, because it's a physical process, these agents will actually weather the rock. Okay, now say for example you have the wind. Okay, now when the wind is flowing over the rock, okay, when strong winds are blowing or there are weak winds which are blowing over the rock, now these winds might be blowing on the rock from millions of years in the making. Okay, right? So millions of years these winds might be flowing on the rock. So say for example this is a rock, okay, and the wind is actually gushing through it. Okay, so when the wind is actually gushing through the rock like this, okay, when it is actually doing like this, it is actually creating a kind of a friction on the rock. Okay, now when friction is created, automatically there is heat which is generated. Okay, and that heat actually slowly removes off the some part of the rock. Okay, now that some part of the rock is going somewhere and it is actually forming soil. Okay, right? Then water is there. Same way, in the same way, water also is actually moving on top of a rock like this. Okay, and when it is moving on top of a rock, okay, now being a fluid, it will slide. Okay, it will glide. Okay, so when it is gliding, it is gliding continuously, if it is gliding continuously on this particular on the rock, what will happen? The rock, because of the force of water, might roll. Okay, it might roll. So when it is rolling, there is constant, when the rock is rolling in this direction, say for example, this is the rock and this is rolling in this direction, there is constant removal of particles of sand from the rock. Okay, there is constant removal of the particles of sand from the rock. Okay, that is why you get what are called as pebbles, small round rocks. Now how are those shapes achieved? They are achieved by constant motion in the by the water. Okay, right? So that is one factor. Then you have the temperature. Now during hot summer seasons or any other season, okay, even if rain is falling, there is water there and the rock is getting weathered because of the force of the drop of the rain which is constantly falling on the rock. Okay, but when we are talking about temperature, because the rock is exposed to various agents like wind and water, and if you get high temperature, there can be a small, if say for example this is a rock, okay, right, when the sun is beating on the rock very high, okay, when the sun is beating on the rock like this, okay, there can be a small crevice which starts because of the pressure which is exerted by the natural forces on that particular rock. There can be crevices. Okay, when the crevices are coming, okay, the temperature also plays a major role here. These crevices actually start opening up and this part of the rock is slowly removed from this part of the rock. Okay, so the temperature, that heat actually penetrates this particular crevice and starts disintegrating the rock from inside. Okay, so that is what is the mechanical weathering. Okay, now moving on to the next one, which is chemical weathering. Now when we talk about chemical weathering, as the name suggests, chemical weathering occurs when rocks are broken down by chemical reactions. Okay, often such type of weathering can change the chemical composition of the soil. Okay, so say for example, if a lightning is striking on a rock, okay, if a lightning is striking on a rock or it is striking on a rock in water, okay, there will be a lot of chemical reactions which will occur in the particular rock. Okay, one lightning strike is enough to change the composition of a rock basically. Okay, right, one small lightning is sufficient. Okay, right, so when this chemical weathering is actually occurring, okay, they change the composition of the soil. That is the main thing that they do. These chemical weathering, they change the composition of the soil completely. Say for example, if the soil was rich in some mineral, now with this chemical weathering and change in the pH of the particular soil can be achieved by chemical reactions. Okay, now in natural process, generally lightning plays a very major role in the chemical weathering process. Okay, right, so next moving on to the biological weathering. Now when we are talking about biological weathering, now biological weathering is not actually a weathering process. Living organisms weaken the subsequently disintegrated rocks often by initiating mechanical or chemical weathering. For instance, tree roots can grow into the cracks in the rocks, paving them apart and causing mechanical fractures. Microorganisms can secrete chemicals that can increase the rock susceptibility to weathering. Okay, so I'll explain you this properly. Now, what is happening here? Now, generally you might have seen, say for example, if you're in Hyderabad and you happen to pass by a flyover, from that underside of a flyover. Okay, now you can see some small plants which are growing not from the ground but from the flyover itself. Okay, say for example, a small peepal tree can start growing from a flyover itself. Now from where is it that the root is actually getting inserted into the soil? How is it happening? Okay, right? Now that plant is, and also you can see these plants growing on old houses as well. Okay, now how is it happening? Now that is basically because there are some chemical forces, or there can be some physical forces which are actually acting on that particular flyover. Now because of this, there can be small cracks which are created. Okay, now from those small cracks, what happens is there can be a plant which can start growing. Okay, now the plant has to grip somewhere. So what it will do, it will take the grip from the crevices which has already been formed. So that is why we said it is not actual weathering process. Okay, right? It is actually additionally, it is actually removing the making the plant survive in that particular crevices. Excuse me. So what happens here, when the plant roots enter into the crevices, they increase the gap, because even roots occupy space. Okay, so they increase the gap, and then what they do, when they increase the gap, slowly the disintegration of the particular house starts. So if there is a house like this, okay, if there is a house like this, okay, right? Now if you see a plant growing from here, okay, so what will happen, these roots will go somewhere here inside. Okay, and slowly what will happen, you can see a crack also developing like this. Okay, right? So what is happening over there, the roots are actually trying to penetrate into those crevices, and they are increasing the gap. So because they have increased the gap here, they have taken this root as well. All right, slowly they will start disintegrating that particular house, but it's a very long process. All right, now next one is chemical weathering. That is basically microorganisms which secrete certain chemicals to dissolve the rock. Okay, so microorganisms, though they are very, very small and they are unicellular, okay, they can be multicellular as well. I'm not saying that, but microorganisms, they can enter into the rocks, okay, for shelter basically. Okay, in order to increase the space which they are around, what they do, they secrete chemicals. Okay, now when they are secreting chemicals, there is a chemical weathering process which will start occurring. Okay, so when this chemical weathering process starts occurring, then what will happen here, the rock will start weathering. Okay, the rock weathering process will start. Okay, right? So in this way, say for example, I'll give you one more example here, which is your say roots is over, mechanical cracking by roots is over, microorganisms cracking it, and also you can see sometimes they can be small animals which start cracking the rock like this. They start scratching the rock this way. Okay, now when they scratch the rock this way, what is happening? They are actually removing the soil from that particular rock. Okay, and the soil gets deposited. In order to make some small shelter for them, some organisms, they scratch the rock. So that way also, that is basically a mechanical weathering. But because it is done by a biological agent, that is why it is called as a biological weathering. Okay, right? So we have seen three types of how soil is formed, that is by mechanical weathering, chemical weathering, and biological weathering. This is mechanical weathering. Then you have the chemical weathering here, and then you have the biological weathering here. All right, so I hope that you have understood this part of the chapter. Okay, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much.